Hi, I am David Ezekiel, interim pastor of the Congregational Church of Batavia. Thank you for joining me as I begin a series on rediscovering our biblical ancestors. They will impart to us insights about ourselves, just as we learn from listening to the stories of our parents, grandparents, and other relatives. For it is a great truth to realize that if you can tell me what you remember, I can tell you who you are. That is why the Bible remembers the stories of our biblical ancestors. Now, if you could gather the great men and women of the scriptures into a single convocation, Paul, David, Elijah, Moses, Abraham, Mary, Elizabeth, John, and you could overhear their conversation, the topic would soon turn to living the life of faith. And all of them would have to agree that the greatest among them would be Abraham. This is how the writer of the book of Hebrews describes him. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he stayed for a long time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old and Sarah herself was barren, because he considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars of heaven and as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Now, these are the broad outlines of Abraham's life, and it was with him that the Old Testament truly begins. He is living in southern Mesopotamia, what is now southern Iraq, and subsequently moves his whole clan north to Haran. Here is where the most formative event of his life occurred. The great God of the universe personally encounters Abraham. In that interaction, the Holy One makes a most extraordinary promise. Abraham would have a land to call his own, descendants more numerous than the sands by the seashore, a name that would resound throughout history, and that because of him, all the families of the earth would be blessed. All the families of the earth would be blessed. To receive this, all Abraham has to do is journey with God. And Abraham did, step by step, because he heard those four little words: the Lord will provide. And so Abraham began a journey that never really ended. First to Palestine, then to Egypt, then back to Palestine, where he moved around constantly. It was only near the end of his life that Abraham ever bought a parcel of land, and that was a piece of property to bury his wife Sarah, and then later himself. But let me point out that God did not call Abraham from out of the blue, from out of nowhere. Even though this man did not have a Bible to learn from, Abraham was not a heathen. He belonged to a family which worshiped God and carried the same great faith traditions. The foundations of faith in which to worship and believe in God were already there. The other peoples around them had taken that same faith and that had once been common to all the world and had let it become distorted. This is what the story of the Tower of Babel is all about. However, Abraham's family kept the faith alive in their own home, in their own family. So when the voice of God speaks to him, Abraham knows who it is. So let me point out three things that Abraham learned on his journey and which we can learn from Father Abraham. First, God's kind of security is dynamic, not static. If there is one word to sum up Abraham's experience, It is movement. He was always on the move. He has nothing to hang on to. Nothing is secure in his life except God's promise. And when he gets up to go with God at the age of 75, when most of us have already retired on Social Security, Abraham is embarking upon social insecurity. Now, Abraham does not regard change and movement as something to be feared or as an enemy to be resisted. He discovered that this is the way in which God works and calls human beings into personal fulfillment. Journeying with the Almighty does not mean sitting still or resting on your blessed assurances. This God which we worship is always beckoning us to go beyond ourselves towards a goal that is not yet attained. It means moving from a binary system of gender identification to one that includes our LGBTQIA siblings. It means moving from a position of white privilege towards a full doctrine of inclusion and equality for all persons. It means moving from one of paying someone to do our work to one where we give of our personal selves and time to be involved with individual lives. It means moving from retelling an old story to living it in new ways. Second, Abraham and we learned that perfection is not a prerequisite before God will begin working in us and through us. Father Abraham manifested many heroic qualities of faith and trust, but he was by no means finished or complete in a personal sense. He was capable of mistrust and fearfulness and faithlessness. We see him failing and falling, being self-serving and selfish, acting cowardly and coercively, feeling disappointed and disillusioned. But we see God working in him at every point along the way, moving him towards God's perfection, what the Creator sees as his full potential. Now, God is willing to take us where we are and just as we are, and is willing to patiently be at work in us to move us towards where the Creator imagines that we should be. The Holy One desires for each of us to reach our full potential so that through us God's work in the world can be accomplished. At this moment, I call to your memory an old hymn that affirms, "Just as I am without one plea." See, I told you that memory is powerful. Beloved, God's perfection is that to which we strive in our human journey. It is not what we have to have in order for God to love us. It is a goal, a destination to which the divine architect is moving us so that we can live now on earth and then forever in eternity. Third, we learn as Abraham did that life is a gift. Abraham was about to offer Isaac on the altar of sacrifice when dramatically God's hand grabs Abraham's hand and stops him. At that point, Abraham really understood that everything he had, even life itself, was a gift. Abraham had done absolutely nothing to deserve such unmerited favor and grace from God. It was all windfall, and the Holy One wanted to find out whether Abraham understood that, or whether Abraham felt that he was entitled to everything because of everything that he had already been through. Even though it was with a heavy heart, Abraham was willing to give everything back. Now, there are many parallels in the New Testament. One is the story of the rich young ruler that encountered Jesus, who went away sorrowfully when Jesus told him to give it all away to the poor, and then come and follow him. Can we realize that we do not anything that we might have been born with? We do not even deserve anything that we might have earned or accumulated in our lifetimes. All that we have is to be construed as a gift. And as a gift, it is to be shared as a gift for someone else. It's not an entitlement. It is not something to be hoarded or abused. There's an old story that says we are born with two hands, one to receive with, and the other in which to give things away. Everything that we have is not ours. It does not belong to just us alone. What God provides for us is to be used as a blessing to all the families of the earth. That's what the Eternal One told Abraham 3 millennia ago. That's what the early church learned when it says that after the day of Pentecost, everything that they had was shared with one another. And that's what you and I are being told this very day. So in all these things, how are you being a blessing to all the peoples of the earth? Are you willing to learn from your biblical ancestor Abraham and undertake some social insecurity for the sake of God's mission, God's great plan for the world, in which you are invited to participate? Are you willing to participate, to get involved, even though you might feel inadequate to the task? Just remember, God never asks about the availability of the qualified, for the Holy One will personally qualify the available. Are you willing to see life, even all that you have, as an unmerited, undeserved gift? Now, what might that look like? For a start, just try these little things. Go out of your way and do something that is outside your comfort level. Maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter. Contact your elected officials and tell them you want to stop the militarizing aspects of America's police forces. Become a mentor to a disadvantaged young person. Volunteer at a crisis hotline. Use your position to influence change for the betterment of all people and for a better life for all. Beloved, remember to use your voice so that you can help people rejoice, because silence only perpetuates violence.